2024 Democratic presidential candidate Marianne Williamson discussed COVID vaccines in a recent conversation with political commentator Bill Maher. Let's take a look.
My view is that because Americans are in such bad shape, they needed a vaccine. So it did save millions of lives. That's my view on that. I was not one of those Americans who wanted it or thought I needed it and resent having to had taken it. Where are you on that?
Well, I certainly don't go as far as Bobby does. I think that the government was afraid to just be honest with the American people.
Right.
I was very
that too.
I was very concerned that there was so little conversation about treatment. And I agree with what you were saying. I think a lot of the danger and the risk involved had to do with the fact that we're not a healthy society. You know, look how much higher the chronic diseases are here than they are in Europe.
And it's all because of obesity, or almost all of it.
A lot of it. Well, we have a sickness care system, as I said last year in last debate, rather than a health care system.
Marianne also fired back at Bill Maher over his comments on the current state of America as a whole.
I'm also saying that when you just ride around, you just see a country that does not look like it's falling apart.
Bill.
Like, my eyes also matter. It matters what I read and what people tell me. It also matters that I just live in this world and I travel a lot and I'm out in the city a lot. And a lot of people are just living their best lives. And they're not all rich. It's not all the top 20%. For all its horrible problems, this country still somehow, how we got through the pandemic and didn't go broke, I don't know. I mean, we probably will in the future. Maybe it's the inflation is part of that issue. But I just don't see a country where the people are just seething and unhappy when I'm out. And that has to count for something.
You know where I was last night? I was speaking to teenagers on Skid Row. Do you know how many people are homeless in Los Angeles County on any given night? 70.
If you go to Skid Row, you're going to, okay.
That's my point. You say you drive around, but where do you drive around?
Okay.
You don't drive too many miles.
Of course, why would I go to Skid Row?
That's kind of my point. So you don't really, you say, I don't see anybody going through that. That's
I
right,
don't.
you're not driving there.
And most
They're
people
more
don't.
than an underclass.
Yes.
There's this invisibilized.
Yes.
So the internet was kind of going on Bill Maher over this one, framing him as out of touch in a similar way that Biden's gotten criticized of late for insisting that everything's great, Bidenomics worked, and people shouldn't be concerned about the state of the economy. Many people think that Marianne is right to have pointed out that Bill Maher is someone who has advertised himself as someone who lives with a level of elitism that he would own. He once castigated a guest for taking a tour bus around. I forget which musician it was. When he's like, why don't you just take a private jet everywhere that you go? He is the guy who kind of prides himself from being able to insulate himself against the realities of the world because of his wealth, and that's fine. But I don't also think that you can say the prescriptions for how we handle the economic future of the country should be based on what I personally see
Yeah, I mean,
from my
you don't
jet
win
plane
any.
window.
Everybody just rolls your eyes if you try to insist on the things are actually a lot better than you think narrative, which I think is probably true to some extent, but you don't win awards for saying it. It was interesting, though, that she would go to like Skid Row, say, no, things are not good, just look at Skid Row. I mean, that is actually something that conservatives do a lot that I thought annoys progressives when they go, you know, we have all these mentally ill homeless people shoplifting and stabbing and doing drugs in the streets, and there's feces everywhere, and progressive prosecutors have let this happen, and we need stronger policies, right?
No,
that's a conservative
progressives
thing.
love to talk about that. Bernie had a plan to end homelessness. But progressives want to talk about it, to do something about it. Republicans want to talk about it. Not all Republicans, but many Republicans in leadership want to talk about it as a way to score points against Democrats.
They have a plan. Well, they have a plan to address crime, imprison criminals.
But many of the homeless people are mentally ill. That's why they're homeless.
They're drug addicted.
Or they're drug addicted.
Right.
So what is their plan? You just want to, if you're just saying Republicans' plan is to lock up everybody who's a drug addict or criminal, mentally ill, they can own that. I don't think that's a good plan. So that's why liberals are mad. That's why the left criticizes them, not because they don't want to address homelessness in the first instance. But I do agree with you.
Crimes, I think they should be locked up.
But I do agree with you on one part of this, which is that Marianne Williamson didn't need to go to Raising the Specter of Skid Row to make a point about how Bill Maher might not be able to see the problems that so many Americans experience on a regular basis. So, for example, 57% of adults, that's the majority, and a significant majority of Americans, who are unable to afford a $1,000 emergency. If you were to break your arm, have to do some kind of dental surgery, fall behind on your mortgage, things like that, you wouldn't be able to come up with that money, and you would be facing eviction, potential homelessness, or death, or being maimed in some way because you weren't able to take care of yourself from a healthcare perspective. We've been talking endlessly, broadly in the country about the incredible rent crisis that's going on right now, where even years ago, there wasn't a single district in the entire country where a person working a full-time 40-hour-a-week salary could afford a one-bedroom apartment in any district in the United States of America, the average cost of a one-bedroom apartment. This is a real crisis that people are experiencing on a daily basis. And so when you hear someone like Joe Biden or someone like Bill Maher say, well, things are getting better, what's the point? If in the abstract, and this is something that Steven Pinker and a lot of these kind of social scientists do, the argument that things are getting better or better than they were since the Middle Ages, or that the standard of global living has gotten better even as the standard of American living has gotten worse, if that is being weaponized as an excuse not to continue to do the work of government to make people's lives better, and instead to sit on your hands and say, oh, I'm doing a great job like Joe Biden said, that's what's pernicious about it. If we could talk about the progress we've made as a society without that being used as an excuse not to fight harder to make life better for people who are continuing to struggle, then I think that liberals and progressives would be a lot more open to having a conversation about, yeah, sure, we can talk about the advances in science and technology and health and stuff around the world that have brought up many poor people over the last years.
And I think you can just bum people out by just excessively dwelling or marinating in how I mean, I feel this way when I talk about issues that are more, or that I'm more expert on or more involved in, like free speech issues, and I talk a lot about the threats to free speech coming from the federal government and the pressure they're putting on social media. But at the end of the day, I do want to always remind people that your ability to speak your mind is less encumbered, there's less barriers to it than have ever existed before in all of human history. That the internet and social media, despite bad moderation, despite what the government's doing, it is easier and better to express dissident, contrarian views and to succeed and to have platforms and to have viewers and have listeners than ever before in human history.
That's important. But
we can still talk about the bad things.
Here's the rub. That's not true if you are, let's say, a unionizing worker at Starbucks, where Howard Schultz, Starbucks CEO, has fired entire staffs in an effort to get them to not be able to express their free speech right, to unionize, and to advocate for their fellow workers to organize their workplace. You do not have those same speech rights when you're working in one of these right-to-work states in the South, in these Republican states, where you can be fired for any reason, including this kind of dissident labor behavior, without having any real recourse to demonstrating that you were fired for illegal reasons under technical federal labor law. So are we going to be as invested in those kind of speech and expression rights, a teacher's rights to teach a curriculum that they in their educational assessment thinks is useful, teaching a book like Beloved, which is considered to be one of the great American novels? I mean, we had a PragerU clip going around the other day. No, we talked about it on the show.
The public teachers they're the teachers that, I mean, I wouldn't fire them for those things, but then that's saying there should be no democratic accountability for government officials. So the standard is there's no free speech. Different.
There's no free speech if you're working at a public institution. Your free speech rights don't matter if you work for the government. That's a position that a person can take. But to me, that is not a principled investment in the rights of all Americans, many of whom are federal employees. The federal government, whatever you think about it, is the number one employer, I believe, of at Walmart, and then the federal government.
Something a lot of the Republican candidates are running against.
That's fine. If Vivek Ramaswamy wants to run against firing 75% of the American workforce, of the federal workforce, that is his right as a free speechy American, and also that's about 19 million people, and all the millions that are their voting family members that will have their lives destroyed by that, who are going to come out in full force and vote against him. I applaud. I encourage him to go and effort out and find out.
Their salaries paid by our taxes for things people don't agree with.
The U.S. Postal Service, you don't agree with it?
The federal government, the
people who administer.
There's so much. You don't think there's any waste, fraud, and abuse?
No, of course there is. But I will tell you what one of the lowest waste programs is in the entire government is Medicare. It's part of why it's so popular. It's efficiently doling out health care that's life-saving to millions of Americans, without which they would be devastated.
What about the Department of Education, the Department of
What about it?
Housing and Urban Development, Energy? We had schools before we had the Department of Education. It's a recent phenomena. You need an enormous federal bureaucracy to coordinate all these things, not improving any no reading scores or math scores have not improved one iota since this giant federal bureaucracy came into being that sucks up all our tax dollars.
There's probably lots of places to address glut. One of the biggest places where our tax money is going to wasteful spending is that we are paying private corporations billions of dollars in the form of the healthcare and pharmaceutical industries to suck out money in exchange for no actual care. That's the real middleman in America that makes our healthcare cost twice as much in this country for nothing as it does in our peer nations, where they simply pay less than people are paying in their premiums.
I mean, fine, cut it. I think I've agreed to fix this 4 times today already.
All right. But, wait, I'm sorry, is Robbie Suave coming out firmly in support of the universal health care system?
Absolutely not, but a system where we have a subsidy for people that charge whatever I've said this already 4 times today.
So the middleman, all I'm saying to you, Robbie, is I appreciate that in some instances there's government bloat.
In a lot of these programs.
But so much of the bloat, if I'm going to be really honest with you, I would agree that there is probably places where there's bloat and excess that should be looked into. I also think that sometimes sussing that out costs more than the waste itself. I do think that that's sometimes the case. But my real issue is that there's these private-public partnerships. I'm much more comfortable with the idea that an American is getting a government salary that is enabling them to support a family. In a world where I actually think there should be universal basic income and all of these kinds of things, because we're all going to be alienated from labor because of technology. We're going to get to a place where we're going to have some kind of system where people are paid not on the basis of whether or not they can dig this ditch for a certain amount of time or fill out numbers on a spreadsheet for a certain number of time a day, but because we realize that we have automated ourselves out of needing to do a lot of that work and we value human life. So to me, if it's somebody earning a salary that can support their family and make them a contributing member of society and keep them happy and safe.
If we automate ourselves out of that work, that will be good. We'll have a more efficient society, and then you can manage the automating system.
I'd rather that government system than a system in which people who are incentivized to exploit us through what I think are human rights services like healthcare are being paid tax dollars and not even conferring the benefit to the public that a government employee who's building roads or providing healthcare or nursing a baby in an ICU.
What do you mean government employee doing those? I mean, those are done by
contractors.
Construction companies build roads.
Unfortunately, because of a lot of conservative pushback, there has been a real resistance to internalizing
the government doesn't know how to build the roads. The contractors know how to build the roads.
Historically, there was a much more interest in having government employees in the FDR era. His cabinet was very notably made up of people who actually were farmers in his agriculture department, for instance, people who had real-world experience. And there has been a decision, because you don't want to grow the size of government, to outsource a lot of the things that government has to do, which has made that there's a lot of opportunity for graft. There just is. There's grifters all over the place because of these government contracts.
I mean, this is going down to some basic, very fundamental economics, but that should be an opportunity to save money.
And
because you give the contract to the person who makes the best.
Robbie, come on. Everyone knows the grift that comes with being able to access government contracts. Everyone knows how much money is lost through this system and how all these bribes and the bidding. How many
there would not be money lost if just the czar of roads says, "Here we go. We'll just build the road." They don't even know. I mean, this is like going to the fundamental economic calculation debate under socialism, where they can't even set the price of anything because there's no market.
There's a question about whether or not the government should build capacity to be able to do things. Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry, I support, you're not going to agree with me, but I support nationalizing any number of businesses and organizations the way that you can have in the other parts of the country, especially natural resources. But most importantly, we should be talking about worker ownership. That's the way you maintain independence and freedom separate and apart from the government, while still having companies run by the people who stand to benefit from them and who also stand to be harmed by any potential policies that they might implement, like moving jobs overseas.
I think most people don't want to turn over the control of industries to got more government bureaucracies, to government commissions. I think they know that does not make the work get done more swiftly or more cost effectively.
I don't know
and
how
never
they would,
has in any society that has
I don't
ever
know how
come
they
into
would
being.
know it. Well, I think that the Scandinavian model is one that many people look very favorably to.
They have markets.
Of course they do. And no one's arguing against their
They don't
existence of markets
nationalize.
now.
They haven't wholesale nationalized all their industries.
No, but they've
that is what you're
nationalized a
arguing
lot of
for
the important
nationalizing.
ones, including their oil industry in Scandinavia, which is the source of the wealth that enables them to do things like provide free healthcare and education.
We should we subsidize those industries here. We should not subsidize them.
I think I'd agree with that.
Yeah, we're in a middle, and you want to go this way, and I want to go this way, but neither of us like the middle we're in.
That's true. But I also think that I know you have a lot of these criticisms of government, some of which are true, but I would rather personally be working toward improving government than basically giving in to the elements that are corrupting our government system. It's these industries, it's these lobbyists, it's these corporatists that are both corrupting the government and taking the money out in the private sector. So why say, well, let's end government?
All under control of government has not
I'm
worked.
not saying that, but what I'm saying is, what happens when we
You get
have
mass
no
starvation.
What happens when we have no pushback against the very corporate entities that are, one, polluting our government and also extracting massive wealth from the working class?
I mean, we've had this argument many times, but I say we end it by giving them less power to affect the outcomes of government because government has less to do. So they just have to compete against each other, and they can't get favorable protections by rigging the rules so that only the existing players can possibly compete.
This is a Mothra versus Godzilla situation, and I don't think just killing Mothra and letting Godzilla stomp around Tokyo was the right solution.
Well, when Mothra just runs things, there are starvations and then eventually wholesale deprivation of even like political freedoms.
I hear they're really going hungry in Sweden right now.
These are these are market economies. These are not.
So let's do that.
Okay.
You don't agree with
I know.
that.
I want to be more like Europe. I absolutely agree
with that,
with
though, Robbie.
I absolutely want to be more like Europe.
Bernie is a social democrat, a Scandinavian social democrat, and you were not a Bernie supporter. You do not support a guy like that.
Do you know how many cops per citizen they have in these countries?
Do you know how many guns per citizens they have in those countries?
Well, we can't magically get rid of guns.
Okay, well then don't bring
hire
up
a lot more cops.
Don't bring up the cop thing.
I know, but you won't. It's just we should be more like Europe until they do something that I don't like.
Oh my goodness! All right, we're rising for you right after this.